The Toyota CHR was a radically styled SUV that brought Toyota, very late admittedly, to a hugely popular part of the market. Over the years, it's been a massive sales success for the brand, bringing lots of new customers in to Toyota. Today, we're in Hamburg to see the second generation CHR, and it could have an even bigger impact. So here it is, the second generation Toyota CHR. Now a hybrid and a plug-in hybrid. And in this video, we're telling you everything that you need to know about it. But before we start, if you want to see lots more new car reveals and reviews, make sure you subscribe to our channel and go to whatcar.com for a great deal on your next car. First, let's remind you what the old CHR was like. And to be honest, it was a bit of a mixed bag. The positives were that it was good to drive and it came with lots of standard equipment, but there were also quite a few major drawbacks, like the fact that the infotainment system really wasn't very good. And in terms of practicality, lots of other rivals were much better when it came to rear seat space and boot space. And on top of all that, the 1.8 litre hybrid system you could get it with, which was the biggest seller, really wasn't particularly inspiring. So, have any of these issues been addressed? Well, let's start by going through what's new with this car. And first, we'll talk about the design, because the original CHR really did feel like a step change for Toyota design back in 2016. This new second generation model doesn't feel like such a radical departure from other new Toyota designs, but it still does look different from before. So you can see you've got these slim headlights, you've got this hammerhead style look at the front as well, and apparently this is going to be something we're going to see on future Toyota models as well. Down the side here you can see, for the first time on a Toyota, you have flush door handles. There's also a new fancy rear light bar design. But perhaps the most striking thing is this bi-tone paint finish that you can see here. Now, that won't be something that's standard on all models. You probably have to pay extra to have it. But if you do, then you get something that looks very different from everything else in the class. Now, inside the new CHR, it does feel like a step up compared to the old model. Some things are the same though. So for example, the position of the driver's seat is the same as the old car. So this doesn't feel like a really high riding SUV at all. There are lots of other SUVs in this class that give you more of a sense of being in a lofty high riding SUV. What's different is everything around the driver is a little bit lower than it was in the CHR. So that gives it a slightly more sporty feel. It also improves visibility as well. And the layout in here generally is very good. You've got a lot of physical buttons on the steering wheel here. It's great you've still got physical buttons for the climate control as well. And there's a nice mix of dense, soft touch materials around too. So the quality of the materials used is really quite impressive. It's not perfect throughout. There are a few wobbles here and some of these plastics do feel a bit cheaper, but generally it is impressive. The biggest step forwards for the car though is here with this infotainment system. This is a 12.3 inch screen. It's running Toyota's latest infotainment software, which we've used in other cars. And it is a huge step forwards from the previous CHR and the frankly rubbish infotainment system that car had. So now this is nicely designed, it's got a simple layout, it's responsive, you get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It would be even better if there were physical controls to help navigate through it, but still, by the standards of the class, this is a good touchscreen infotainment system. There's also a fully digital driver display that's available as well, which is nice and big, looks very nice, and it's clear, easy to see. And there is also 64 different colours you can have for the ambient interior lighting. And you can see this light strip here actually doubles up as a new safety function that's available with the CHR. So if you go to open your door when there's something in your blind spot, like a pedestrian, a cyclist or another car, then this turns red, and if you carry on opening the door, then it flashes red to warn you, which is handy, isn't it? Now, in terms of the storage that's available in here, the door bins are a decent size. They're not huge, but still fairly practical. You've got 2 cup holders on the center console. You've got this armrest with really quite a decent sized cubby underneath it as well. So, all in all, this does feel like a step forwards for the CHR. Now, the dimensions of the new CHR are actually very similar to the old CHR, so much so that the distance between the front and rear wheels is actually exactly the same. And yes, the new car is slightly taller, a little bit wider, but generally you're not going to notice a difference in space when you're sat in this car. Which isn't great news in the rear seats, to be honest, because the old CHR wasn't particularly practical. And so it's the same story for this new one. You can see legroom isn't particularly great. Headroom, if I sit up straight, then my head is touching the roof lining, and if you're 6 foot or over, then you're definitely going to feel very cramped back here. There are some differences from the old CHR though. So for example, now you can get a sunroof fitted to the car. We sat in a CHR with a sunroof, and the good thing is it doesn't eat into the headroom, which is great. And obviously it lets a lot more light in as well to make it feel a little bit less claustrophobic. Now, these rear windows are also apparently bigger than before, which is good, but they're still very small, so they don't really let much light in themselves. Another disappointment back here, and again, this was actually similar to the previous car. The materials on this door card are just kind of cheap feeling scratchy plastics, which are very different from the plush materials that you're given at the front of the car. So it just generally isn't great being sat in these rear seats, to be honest, especially if you're an adult. But Toyota said they never really considered making the new CHR bigger than the old one, because people buy this car for the styling. And they know that people with families who need something very practical just won't buy a CHR, which is fine, but just be aware that for the money, there are lots of other rivals around which are more practical, particularly when it comes to rear seat space. And it's the same story for the boot. Now, we don't have any official boot capacity figures just yet. They're going to be released later. But what we do know and what we've been told is that the new CHR is going to offer a very similar amount of storage space as the old CHR. And we know that with that model, it had one of the smaller boots in the class that it was in. And you can also see that if you go for a plug-in hybrid model like this, then the capacity is reduced even further. If you go for a hybrid model, then it will look like this. Now, this is an entirely new generation of CHR, but it is apparently based on the old car's platform, but there have still been some mechanical tweaks to it. So the front and rear suspension has been reworked. It's also got a wider track, and we've been told that the main difference you're going to notice driving this car compared to the old one is a big improvement in refinement. So apparently the isolation in here is much better, it's quieter, and because the engines have been upgraded, they won't have to work as hard as the old engines would have done, and we know that should be the case having driven them in the new Corolla. And generally ride comfort should be improved as well, because they put a lot of work in improving the body control of the CHR and making it more comfortable. That's also partly because this car now comes with bigger alloys. So before you could get 16 to 19-inch alloys, but now the choice starts at 17-inch alloys and goes up to 20-inch alloys. And actually, if you go for those biggest 20-inch alloys, then it gets a different suspension setup slightly compared to the rest of the lineup. And the plug-in hybrid does as well. But of course, we'll have to wait until we drive the car to see if those claims of greater comfort and greater refinement are true. The CHR engine lineup at launch will include a 1.8 litre hybrid and a 2 litre hybrid. Now, that is the same as what was offered before, but these are the latest hybrid options that you'll also find in the most recent version of the Corolla. And we know in that car that the 1.8 litre in particular is much better than it was before. So, whereas in the previous CHR, the 1.8 option really was a weakness of the car, that shouldn't be the case now from what we know of that system in the Corolla. And as a first for the CHR, there's also a 4-wheel drive setup. That's available if you go for the 2 litre hybrid. And another first is the fact that you can get a plug-in hybrid version of the CHR. That gets a 2 litre petrol engine and a 13.8 kilowatt-hour battery. It's also the fastest option in the CHR lineup. And the official claimed electric range that we've been told is around 66 kilometers, which is 41 miles. And that is pretty good, to be honest. And quite rare for a hybrid, it also comes with a heat pump as standard. So that means if you're heating the interior of the car when it's cold, you'll be able to do so in a more efficient way than if you didn't have a heat pump. And another rare offering for a hybrid is a one-pedal driving mode. So if you're driving this in fully electric mode, when you lift off the accelerator with that mode engaged, then the car will be able to slow itself down to a complete stop. Now, nothing official has been confirmed, but it's unlikely that we'll see a fully electric version of the CHR. Instead, if you want an electric SUV this kind of size built by Toyota, you'll probably have to wait for a BZ model in the future. Now we've already seen the BZ4X, and if you want to see our full review of that car, then click on the link at the top of the screen. And there are lots more BZ models planned for the future. Official pricing is yet to be announced, but the previous CHR started around £29,000. So for the new model, it's reasonable to expect a jump up to something like the low to mid £30,000. Now, compared to a traditional SUV with a regular petrol engine like the Skoda Karoq or the Seat Ateca, this looks pretty expensive. But that pricing is more in line with other hybrid SUVs like the Honda HR-V. So that is everything we know so far about the new Toyota CHR. Some things seem different, some things seem similar. What do you think of the car? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want to make sure you see our full in-depth review of the car as soon as we've driven it, subscribe to our channel. And don't forget, go to whatcar.com for a great deal on your next car.